Now for our final session, we'll shift gears slightly to focus on the most important stakeholder in any life sciences endeavour or deal, the patient. In a fireside chat which centres around how do patients and R&D leaders truly understand each other's priorities, we'll hear from two inspirational leaders who are true champions of patient engagement. Please join me in welcoming Elin Davies, founder of Aparito, and Elaine Warburton, OBE, from Javelo. Both are pioneers in our industry and fierce advocates for ensuring patient needs remain at the heart of what we do. Please, let's give them a warm welcome.
Hello, everyone. I think we're going to have a little shorter session as well, so don't worry. Lunch will be coming, but we've had some really interesting sessions earlier on, and I can't believe, Tony, you've done amazingly. We've managed to talk about champagne, one-night stands, you name it. It all happens at Genesis Conference. Yes, I hope this is going to be equally as good.
Well, let's hope so.
Yes. So do you want to kick off?
Yeah, well, maybe just introduce myself. So I'm Elin Davies. I founded Aparito 10 years ago. We were recently acquired by Eli Lilly. Prior to that, I was a children's nurse and got very quickly involved with supporting patients and family through all parts of their care. And that sort of patient input, patient co-creation has then sort of been built throughout my career since then.
Brilliant. Two E's today.
Yeah.
So I'm Elaine Warburton, and I realise it's almost 35 years to the day I was sitting on here, actually starting out my career, and I realised we're 35 years gone. So I have a very eclectic background, geneticist and a nurse as well, burns and reconstruction, and I ran hospitals. I'm a chartered accountant, done marketeering, and I've introduced around now 85 devices and technologies and services into mainstream medicine. So I feel very, very old right now, and some of the technologies now have gone. But I currently am chair of a number of portfolio companies, ranging from technologies, healthcare, medical devices, diagnostics, and I do a lot of advising for early stage companies, particularly introducing technologies into mainstream medicine and being a patient advocate as well.
Excellent. So do you want to, do you want to sort of kick off with specific aspects of the journey, or how do you want to?
I think technology success ends or lives on the patient or the end user. When we were talking about patients, but I think we're going to talk more about end users, patients, nurses, medical professionals, etc. And you really need to involve patients and end users right from the get-go. I do recall that you will have certain interesting elements to your journey when developing technologies. And I know one of the most dire things that happened to me on Quantum DX, which is a company a medical device company, diagnostics company I set up, was we started to use patient interest and advocacy and realised with the device, a QPOC, which can diagnose, it's for the real Theranos, basically can diagnose many diseases simultaneously. And we were looking at handheld diagnostics as well. So this is way back in 2014. And so we put it into the hands of patients in order to develop handheld technologies. And one of the first things that happened was it got nicked. And that didn't go down well with the laboratories. Someone took it to the loo and it fell down the toilet. Very common with smartphones. And it was at that time, and it broke my heart, it was a huge, great thing, it actually broke my heart, that we had to move from handheld technologies into benchtop or little benchtop devices. So the whole dream could go up in flames because we put it into a device, into the hands of a user, and they realised they didn't want to have that particular format. So I'm just saying it could be very pro, but it'd also be very con.
Yeah,
as well.
And maybe just to set the scene. So my career, as mentioned, was a children's nurse supporting children and family through clinical trials. And at that time, there were two instant sort of learnings that I had in the first few pharmaceutical-funded clinical trials. One is that patients and family would say, why are we using this endpoint to sort of evaluate the efficacy of this treatment when this endpoint has no relevance to what's important to us in a day-to-day life. And that also not only it wasn't measuring what was important to patients and family, but also in many instances, particularly for children and children with sort of health-related issues, were not assessments that they could do. So even when it came to the results of the clinical trial, they would sort of say, but you failed to capture what was important to us. And that drove where we were coming from in terms of saying, okay, you're investing thousands and indeed millions of pounds in developing this most innovative mechanism of action and formulation. And yet when it comes to measuring the efficacy, you're relying on paper-based evidence through PROs and questionnaires. Why is there not an investment of equal proportion to develop in the endpoints that measures what's important to patients? And that was very much where we try to illustrate our ECOA framework and our patient group accelerators, was to say, at the very early stages, let's ask patients what is important to them and how they want to measure it. So the how is, equally as important. And, the sort of traveling to hospitals to take part in very long, painful assessments that don't convey what's important to patients is something that I think we need to change. It is changing marginally, but not as a pace that I would want. And by getting the patient voice much, much earlier into that discussion is something that I feel strongly about, that could get, regulators or data that's meaningful from the offset, quicker regulatory review, but equally, most importantly, the reimbursement and demonstration of value add to society.
Honestly, I couldn't agree more on getting a patient involved very, very early. And I would even go down to as early as the eureka moment as well. That's when you're in the bath or wherever, you've got your eureka moment, you've got some idea or proposition that could be a winner, your unicorn. And I'd actually pass it on to friends and family to see if it's, first of all, a goer. And then once it becomes a go, and hopefully you've got your seed funding, your early stage seed funding, and then you move on to early prototypes. I can't stress the benefits of every single stage of the journey, every single prototype and iteration of your baby needs to have some sort of end user involvement. We're sometimes too arrogant. Sometimes we think as inventors we're too arrogant to think, oh, of course, I'm going to make it, they're going to use it. Why not? Why wouldn't they? But it's amazing just how interesting how other people's takes are on your technology as well. And it's so important that if from the early prototype, you then put it out into focus groups. Later stage prototype, put it into focus groups, get back lots and lots of feedback to make sure that ultimately, when you do get your product and it's going through regulatory trials, etc., it is something that end users want and in a format that end users will actually use. So you've got half a chance of being successful commercially with your baby.
Yeah, I'll be a little bit cynical because I'm quite good at being a bit provocative and a devil's advocate. But I think if we looked at the number of people that stood up and left just before we were about to take, I think it shows that actually it's very little kind of focus that's been given to the patient voice or the end user in this discussion, where it should be far earlier in the discussion. And I think particularly if you're building a business model that's B2C. So for us, we were building a software technology that was selling to the pharmaceutical industry, but actually our end users were patients and site staff. And therefore we were sort of having to balance that we need the pharmaceutical companies to be paying the licensing fees and using our technology, but we need to make sure that it's the patients and the site staff that really love our product, that they want to carry on using it and putting the data in it that the sponsor ultimately wanted. And so when you have a bit of we definitely were not B2B because we were never charging the patients and the site staff to use our technology, but they were the voice that we listened to the most, not the ones that were actually paying us. And I think that was quite a a difficult place for us to be in, to justify why we were prioritising the voice of the patients and the site staff, not necessarily the voice of the people that were paying for our services.
Yes. Although they're very important, as we heard earlier, we do need to have money, and it's an absolute bitch out there in terms of funding. Excuse my French. But I also agree on the patient involvement side. I mean, there's 7 to 8 billion people in this world, and each of us is very different, whether you look at it from a genetic point of view, cultural point of view. And you'll be so surprised at what they come back with. I think we were talking earlier over email and things. There are like 3 different types of individual. There's the individual who's like, what are the yep yeahs as I call them. Yeah, I know what to do. I know what to do. You know, when I use your technology, I'm gonna get it wrong. Then we have what I call the auditors. So they're the ones that will look at the instructions and audit everything and then start to Google to make sure that, you know, side effects is this, that, and the other. And then we have the very busy working people, the yummy mummies, the great dads, etc., who are the best speed readers out, and they're quick looking at the instructions. And you've really got to make your technology and instructions for use of technology completely watertight. And the only way you can do that is through patient involvement. You've got to make it so simple, intuitive, and something that everyone can use. Because it still surprises me what patients and end users get up to with your product.
And obviously with that sort of context of use, from our side, the GCP inspectors will absolutely need to know that the training for both site staff and patients has been so robust. And again, even the lay language of how to convey the training, let alone the user experience of the eCOA, was a mandatory part of our pathway to the development of our software platform in that regard.
Yeah, a lot of people ask us, well, how do you actually access patients? How do you actually access end users? A lot of it comes from your own networks anyway. And when we're talking about patients, obviously the NHS is number one. And they're already set up to have patient champions. As, you know, you just go NHS patient champions, you go into the website, you speak to your consultants as well. They've got a huge network. The charities that are involved in your particular area, they all have, they're actually former patients, so they will be able to identify, you know, who best to go to. We have public bodies and the grant bodies like Innovate UK and NIHR. They also have they place a huge, I'm a grant reviewer, they place a huge emphasis on public-patient interactions as well. So they've got a massive network if you're looking to how to access patient involvement. There is big opportunities everywhere that you can access.
Yeah, I mean, highly recommend working with patient groups directly if you're going to a specific disease area. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all, so you do need to make sure that you get to the absolute sort of disease-specific or kind of therapeutic areas that you want. Just because it worked in one disease group does not mean that it'll work in a different disease group, and so you'll need to sort of get early user input from them. And you know, that's where with our patient group accelerators we learned so much for every single disease group that we worked with. And I would say, having been a chair of a patient advocacy group for inherited metabolic disorders, I would also just put one call out. If you're approaching these patient groups who are very small budget, tight resources, please make sure that it's not a tokenism thing. The night before your grant is due to Wellcome Trust, LifeArc, whoever, and you realise that there's a small print that says you must get input from a patient group, do not put the patient group in a difficult situation of giving them a pre-written letter of their support to sign and submit with the application, and then never going back to them for their actual input, because I'm afraid that I have seen that happen on a few occasions too.
Yeah, as a grant reviewer, I can tell you that's a huge one, absolutely huge one. I suppose, do you have any really good experiences and bad experiences that you can give us a little anecdote?
Yeah, so I think one of the ones that we're most proud of is our work with Duchenne UK. So for some of you may be familiar, Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a devastating illness, and as the boys slowly lose their muscle strength, they move from a phase that's called late ambulant phase to non-ambulant phase. And a lot of the clinical trials have been designed to utilize the 6-minute walk test, which again, you'll be familiar with, which was developed for adults in another disease, but sort of now widely adopted as a primary endpoint in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And the patient community, having seen multiple clinical trials fail to demonstrate efficacy, with a bit of a niggly feeling that actually we're not sure if it was the drug that failed or if it was the selection of endpoint that failed, wanted to look at could they develop more meaningful endpoints that represented what was important to them. And importantly, they said that this sort of, black and white distinction between late ambulant and non-ambulant is not actually reflective of the disease state. What you have is this transfer transition phase in the middle where the patients are able to do a few steps. They are able to weight bear, so they can get from their wheelchair to the toilet. They can get, from the wheelchair to the bed, and quality of life is relatively okay while they can do that. So what we actually need is an endpoint that cuts across both non-ambulant and ambulant phases and measures the significant importance of this transfer stage. So we collaborated with them. They defined what the terms of transfer was. We developed video-based outcomes to sort of measure that with the impact of a per limb, and then co-designed a validation study to go with it. And I think that's an illustration of patient-led kind of voices saying what you're measuring over there is not actually what's important to our quality of life. This is how we want to measure it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I suppose one of the studies that I did, which I'm proud of, but also in a funny sort of ways, I was very heavily involved, and I still believe that in cervical cancer and trying to reduce the burden of cancer through early stage diagnostics. And we developed an HPV test that we were taking out into sub-Saharan Africa as well. So we're working with the Gates Foundation, PATH, and Clinton Health Access Initiative, and various others as well, to work in a multi-trial a number of centres as well, up and down different parts of Africa. And we thought it was absolutely brilliant. We look at HPV, and we could do it very rapidly in 20 minutes and discreetly as well. Anyway, we went into various villages with our device in our backpacks and started to set up, and no patients came along. And we're thinking, what the hell's happening? And what we hadn't considered and hadn't taken into consideration was the fact that in certain cultures, women, it was inappropriate for a woman to, because it's self-sampling from the vaginal area, in certain cultures it was inappropriate for a woman to be self-sampled or sampled from a certain part without their husband in attendance. Now, the woman didn't want to let the husband know that she was going to go to be sampled for HPV, because then that would cause undue hardship for the husband as well, putting the blame on the husband that he may have be holding HPV. And so we ended up having to rejig the entire study and call it a different name, so that the women could come along with their children and also their friends, their female friends as well, as almost like a walk-in centre for a cup of tea and community, so that they could actually be sampled and tested discreetly without their husbands. And they all wanted to be tested as well, because at the time cervical cancer in certain parts of sub-Saharan Africa was very, very high, the prevalence of it very high. So very interesting. We ended up managing to do it and managed to get some fantastic data on that, and also engaging so that we could do very discreet HPV testing, which would then hopefully reduce we could do something about it and reduce the prevalence of cervical cancer. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes, and I guess we'll just be so rounding off. I think we've both got a couple of things that.
Well, I guess maybe just particularly pertinent from your example. One of the sort of sayings I often refer to in this sort of importance of getting the end user and particularly the patient's view very, very early on is, I do love an African proverb, which is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And actually, that's where I think that we should really remind ourselves that it doesn't matter what we want to develop in the life science sector unless we get the patient's point of view and experiences considered right at the beginning, then the journey is not going to be very far.
And on that note, a beautiful saying. Thank you very much. I think it's now lunchtime.